When the world lost Paul Newman back in 2008, most people believed his greatest contribution wasn't the countless films or the prestigious awards lining his shelves. It was something far more meaningful. A brand called Newman's Own, built entirely on the principles of generosity and genuine purpose. Before his passing, Newman entrusted the future of this remarkable enterprise to individuals he genuinely believed would protect and honor everything it stood for. However, according to his eldest daughter, that sacred trust appears to have been shattered. She's now speaking out, claiming that the very essence of her father's original vision is being systematically dismantled. The core values he championed, the intentions he held dear, even the meaningful role his family was meant to play, all of it seems to be slipping away. Looking back with clear eyes, the warning signs were actually there from the beginning. Subtle alterations here and there, quiet erasures that went largely unnoticed, critical decisions being made without consulting the very people who understood Paul Newman best. For many years, these growing concerns bubbled quietly beneath the surface, discussed only in private conversations. But now, one of Paul Newman's own daughters has decided she's done staying silent, and she's fully prepared to reveal what she truly believes has transpired behind closed doors. The year was 1925, and in the peaceful suburban landscape of Cleveland Heights, Ohio, a baby boy named Paul Leonard Newman came into this world, already blessed with those piercing blue eyes that would eventually mesmerize audiences across the globe. But behind that angelic infant face wasn't some quiet, obedient child destined for an easy path. Young Paul was quite the handful, brimming with mischief, endlessly curious, and constantly dancing along that fine line, separating irresistible charm from genuine trouble. Hollywood had absolutely no clue what force was heading its way. But trouble certainly recognized Paul Newman from day one. Even in his earliest years, Newman experienced an undeniable magnetic attraction toward performing and entertaining others. Yet despite this pull, academic excellence wasn't exactly his forte. Growing up as a young Jewish boy in his community, he frequently found himself standing out, unfortunately for all the wrong reasons. His high school fraternity rejected his membership application, and a close family friend would later recall quite simply that those were genuinely rough times for him. But perhaps the harshest critic Paul ever faced was actually himself. Reflecting on those formative years much later in life, he openly confessed that he never genuinely felt naturally gifted at anything whatsoever. Not in athletic pursuits, not in his schoolwork, not even in basic social interactions. It seems almost impossible to believe when you consider the towering icon he would eventually become. But that profound, gnawing sense of personal inadequacy would ultimately shape his character in unexpected and powerful ways. The situation at home provided little refuge from these struggles. His father, Arthur Newman, operated a sporting goods store and maintained firm expectations that Paul would eventually inherit and manage the family business. But Paul's heart was pulling him in an entirely different direction. He yearned for something larger than himself, something beautifully unpredictable. The relationship between father and son remained perpetually distant and emotionally cold. Arthur was a hard man, prone to heavy drinking, and certainly not the type to offer encouraging words or emotional support. Paul frequently felt as though nothing he accomplished could ever truly measure up to his father's unspoken standards. Then there was his mother, Teresa, who presented an entirely different set of challenges. She was an absolute perfectionist, carrying old-world European sensibilities into their American home, obsessively keeping furniture wrapped in protective plastic coverings and maintaining rigid emotional control. One moment she would smother young Paul with overwhelming affection and attention. The very next day, she might unleash her considerable temper without warning. On the surface, the Newman household appeared polished, proper, and perfectly respectable. But lurking behind that carefully maintained facade was constant tension and emotional volatility. Despite all this turbulence, Paul somehow discovered his escape route. His very first genuine taste of performing arrived when he was merely 7 years old. Cast in a tiny role as a court jester in a local community production of Robin Hood. From that single transformative moment forward, the stage became his sanctuary, his safe haven from all the chaos. He eagerly joined the children's theater program at the prestigious Cleveland Playhouse, and that initial creative spark just continued growing brighter with each passing performance. After successfully graduating high school in 1943, Newman enrolled at Ohio University, pledging the Phi Kappa fraternity and attempting to settle into normal college life. But that ordinary existence barely had time to take root before the massive upheaval of World War II changed absolutely everything. Newman made the determined decision to enlist in the Navy, harboring dreams of becoming a skilled fighter pilot. The popular story that circulated later suggested that colorblindness prevented him from achieving this goal, but that widely believed tale simply wasn't accurate. Newman himself would later openly admit that mathematics, not any vision problems, ultimately grounded his aviation ambitions. The complex calculations required for flying combat aircraft just weren't among his natural strengths. Still burning with determination to serve his country meaningfully, he pursued training as a radio man and rear gunner, and that's precisely where fate intervened once again, this time quite literally to preserve his life. In 1945, his assigned unit received orders to deploy aboard the aircraft carrier USS Bunker Hill, but at the very last possible moment, his pilot suddenly developed a severe and debilitating ear infection, forcing their entire crew to remain behind while the ship departed without them. Just days later, the Bunker Hill suffered a devastating attack when 2 Japanese kamikaze planes struck the vessel, resulting in hundreds of casualties among the crew members still aboard. If not for that single pilot's unfortunate earache, Paul Newman's entire story could have ended right there in the Pacific Ocean, never to unfold. He eventually returned home to American soil carrying an entirely new sense of clarity and purpose. That impossibly close call with death didn't merely spare his physical life. It ignited an intense fire deep within his soul, instilling a fierce determination to ensure his second chance at existence would truly matter and leave a lasting mark on the world. Following the conclusion of World War II, Paul found himself standing at a genuine crossroads, wrestling with fundamental questions about his identity and his future direction. He certainly wasn't afraid of hard work or humble beginnings either. He attempted just about every odd job imaginable, from hauling heavy encyclopedia sets around and knocking on countless doors as a traveling salesman, to even stepping between the ropes and training seriously as a boxer. Newman hustled relentlessly, grinding away at whatever opportunities presented themselves. But eventually, that restless creative energy led him toward Kenyon College located in Gambier, Ohio. That academic environment became where his acting passion truly caught fire and burned bright. He immersed himself completely in the college theater scene, studying dramatic arts intensively while simultaneously earning a formal degree in economics, which he completed in 1949. Following graduation, he hit the road immediately, joining various summer stock theater companies, including the Belfry Players and the Woodstock Players. Those demanding touring gigs served as his essential training ground, helping him sharpen his natural instincts and refine his emerging craft. Then came an intensive year spent at the renowned Yale School of Drama, where he approached his technique development with absolute seriousness. After completing that rigorous training, he headed straight to New York City to study under the legendary Lee Strasberg, widely recognized as one of the most respected and influential acting teachers in the entire world. It was during this determined pursuit of his artistic dreams that Newman also encountered Jackie Witt, a fellow aspiring performer who would become his first wife. They married quite young, tying the knot in 1949, but their relationship showed cracks and tensions from the very beginning. Newman's mother, Teresa, never offered her approval of the union. Operating from her rigid old-world mindset and values, she looked down upon Jackie as merely the daughter of a local butcher and didn't consider her a suitable or appropriate match for her son. But as future events would dramatically unfold, Teresa's maternal disapproval would prove to be the absolute least of their marital troubles. By 1953, Newman had successfully landed his major breakthrough on Broadway, appearing in the acclaimed play Picnic. What he couldn't possibly know at that pivotal moment was that stepping onto that particular stage would simultaneously introduce him to the remarkable woman who would forever change the entire trajectory of his life, the talented actress Joanne Woodward. Now, their initial meeting wasn't some romantic Hollywood-style love-at-first-sight scenario. Joanne certainly thought Paul was handsome, undeniably so, but perhaps too handsome in a way that seemed almost unreal, excessively perfect with his impeccably clean-cut appearance and unfailingly polite charm. She later admitted that he initially seemed more like someone who had stepped directly out of a glossy magazine advertisement rather than presenting as a genuine, complex human being. But beneath that polished, carefully maintained exterior lay surprising depth, authentic warmth, and sharp wit that she absolutely hadn't expected to discover. And for Paul's part, while it was Joanne's striking beauty that first captured his attention, her formidable intelligence and spirited personality kept him genuinely intrigued and coming back for more. Gradually, over time, deep admiration began steadily replacing initial surface-level infatuation. Still, there remained one enormous, unavoidable problem. Paul Newman was already a married man, and he and Jackie had 2 young children waiting for him at home. What began innocently as a purely professional connection with Joanne quietly transformed into something considerably deeper, something absolutely forbidden by every social convention. Before long, Newman found himself living an exhausting, secret double life, playing the role of devoted husband and responsible father on one side, while simultaneously pursuing his identity as a rising star and secret lover on the other. The situation grew even more morally complicated and messy when his wife Jackie gave birth to their 3rd child while he continued, seeing Joanne secretly behind her back. Newman would later openly admit that the crushing guilt tore at his conscience constantly, keeping him awake through countless long nights. But despite that tremendous guilt, the powerful pull he felt toward Joanne remained completely undeniable and overwhelming. After the production of Picnic concluded its run, Paul and Joanne went their separate ways professionally for a considerable period. But fate clearly wasn't finished writing their story together. Several years later, their paths crossed again unexpectedly, and this time around, all those carefully buried feelings came rushing back to the surface with even greater intensity. The deep connection they'd felt was still powerfully present, actually stronger than it had been before. They soon came to realize they shared far more than simple physical chemistry or professional respect. Both came from family backgrounds where their fathers were successful, driven businessmen, and both had developed complicated, often painful relationships with their demanding mothers. That profound mutual understanding drew them closer together, continuously deepening their emotional bond beyond the superficial. When they eventually made the decision to move to Hollywood together, their respective careers began rising in tandem, each success feeding the other. They both successfully landed lucrative studio contracts, and their secret affair evolved into something far more serious and committed. Their relationship reached its absolute boiling point while filming The Long Hot Summer together in 1957. The on-screen chemistry between them was absolutely electric and impossible to hide. But off-screen, it became painfully clear that Newman's complicated life had reached a critical breaking point that demanded resolution. He finally made the difficult but necessary decision to leave his marriage behind permanently. In 1958, he convinced Jackie to grant him a divorce so he could legitimately marry Joanne and begin their life together openly. But the emotional fallout from this decision was absolutely brutal for everyone involved. Jackie later admitted quite candidly that the betrayal cut incredibly deep into her soul, and even many years afterward, she said the intense pain never really faded or healed completely. Newman's daughter Stephanie would later recall that the painful split absolutely destroyed her mother emotionally. Despite all the genuine heartbreak he left in his wake, Newman and Woodward's developing love story transformed into one of Hollywood's most celebrated and iconic romantic pairings. They officially married in 1958, both riding high with thriving careers and possessing an undeniable magnetic energy that audiences simply couldn't get enough of, both on screen and off. Paul frequently described Joanne as genuinely one of a kind, absolutely irreplaceable, and she viewed him as remarkably steady, authentically kind, and deeply genuine in ways rare among Hollywood stars. But despite all their fairy tale public appearances and carefully cultivated image, their celebrated love story wasn't even remotely picture-perfect behind closed doors. The year 1958 proved to be a genuinely landmark year for Paul Newman on multiple fronts. Not only did he marry the exceptional Joanne Woodward, but he also delivered one of the single most defining and memorable performances of his entire distinguished career, starring in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof alongside the dazzling Elizabeth Taylor. The film became an absolutely massive commercial and critical hit, earning him his very first Academy Award nomination and officially cementing his prominent place among Hollywood's established elite performers. On the surface, it appeared as though everything in his professional and personal life was falling perfectly and beautifully into place. But behind that glamorous, carefully constructed public image, the reality of life at home was considerably more complicated and troubled. While Paul was just beginning his ascent to true stardom, Joanne had already experienced significant success and recognition. The year before, in 1957, she'd achieved the remarkable distinction of becoming one of the youngest actresses in history to win an Academy Award for her powerful performance in The Three Faces of Eve. At merely 27 years old, she was being widely hailed throughout the industry as Hollywood's next great leading lady with unlimited potential. But that brilliant spotlight didn't remain focused on her for very long. Before she fully grasped what was happening, Paul's rising star began climbing so extraordinarily high that it completely eclipsed her own considerable achievements, a depressingly familiar pattern repeated countless times throughout film industry history. Then in 1959, the couple joyfully welcomed their first child together, and everything began shifting in new directions. Joanne started consciously putting her family responsibilities first, often feeling torn between her genuine love for acting and her deeply felt responsibility as a devoted mother. She carried a profound sense of guilt eating at her every single time she had to leave her children behind to travel to a distant movie set. Eventually, she made the conscious choice to prioritize motherhood over pursuing her acting career with the same intensity. But that significant sacrifice came with very real professional consequences. While she remained home with their rapidly growing family, Paul's fame absolutely skyrocketed to unprecedented heights, and that growing imbalance between their careers quietly bred festering resentment that accumulated over time. Many years later, Joanne would speak with refreshing candor about those difficult sacrifices and the complex feelings surrounding them. She genuinely adored her children deeply and wouldn't trade them for anything. But she openly admitted that attempting to be both a serious working actor and a fully present parent felt nearly impossible to balance successfully. That harsh reality was something Paul struggled with understanding, too. He spent a substantial portion of his life attempting to reconcile his carefully cultivated public image as the perfect, devoted husband and exemplary father with the genuine guilt and domestic chaos that frequently played out behind their closed doors, away from public view. Paul Newman had successfully transformed into the ultimate Hollywood heartthrob, the legendary blue-eyed icon who seemingly possessed everything anyone could possibly desire. His much publicized devotion and faithfulness to Joanne became an integral part of his public legend, especially after one particular now famous interview response made international headlines. When a journalist asked him directly how he managed to remain faithful in a town full of temptation, he compared staying loyal to his wife to the simple choice of preferring a quality steak at home over settling for a common hamburger elsewhere. Fans absolutely loved that quotable line, and it quickly became one of the most frequently quoted statements of his entire career. But Joanne absolutely hated it with a passion. She later admitted, quite frankly, that the comparison made her feel objectified and reduced, as though she was being compared to a mere piece of meat, rather than being respected as an equal partner and individual. Beneath their carefully maintained glamorous public image, that kind of casual thoughtlessness hinted at deeper underlying cracks running through their marriage. There existed another heavy burden weighing constantly on Newman's conscience as well, the painful emotional distance separating his two distinct families. His 3 children from his first marriage to Jackie lived relatively modestly with limited means, while his 3 daughters with Joanne grew up surrounded by luxury in their beautiful Beverly Hills estate. That stark, undeniable contrast gnawed at his conscience relentlessly. He recognized the obvious difference clearly, felt it deeply in his gut, and carried that particular guilt heavily for many years. Joanne tried her absolute best to bridge that uncomfortable emotional gap between the 2 families, but it remained a persistent source of pain that lingered painfully for both of them throughout their lives together. As their combined family continued growing, 3 daughters together with Joanne, plus Newman's 3 older children from his previous marriage, their household overflowed with abundant life, frequent laughter, and precisely the kind of wonderful chaos that only accompanies a large, complicated, blended family. But lurking behind all that domestic activity, there existed a considerably darker shadow that followed Newman persistently for decades: his serious dependence on alcohol. For a substantial portion of his adult life, Newman quietly battled a significant drinking problem that few outside his inner circle fully recognized. He frequently consumed an entire case of beer daily, sometimes followed by additional scotch in the evenings. Despite his tremendous professional success, his drinking created genuine pain and serious problems at home that couldn't be ignored. Joanne would later describe his alcoholism quite directly as the anguish of their lives together. From the very beginning of their relationship, she'd clearly seen the warning signs appearing. She firmly believed drinking served as his primary coping mechanism for dealing with overwhelming guilt, enormous stress, and the intense internal battles he rarely discussed openly with anyone. Even as the problem steadily deepened and worsened over time, Newman somehow remarkably managed to keep it almost entirely hidden from the curious public and media. He remained impressively high-functioning, never allowing his drinking to visibly derail his professional career or tarnish his carefully maintained public image. But the serious toll it extracted on his physical body and the health of his marriage was undeniably heavy and real. His daughter would later recall with painful clarity how to physically shake off the lingering effects of heavy drinking. He maintained a daily ritual of dunking his entire face in ice-cold water each morning before starting his day's activities. Still, despite his efforts at management, his drinking would inevitably lead to some truly painful and frightening moments. One particularly terrible night, things deteriorated so badly that Joanne discovered him passed out cold on their bedroom floor, visibly injured after falling hard out of bed. That frightening moment became her absolute breaking point emotionally. Furious and heartbroken simultaneously, she immediately packed up their 3 young daughters, drove directly to their Malibu beach house, and mentally prepared to leave him permanently for good. When Paul eventually realized what had actually happened and that his family had left, he followed her there desperately, absolutely determined to somehow make things right and repair the damage. But Joanne stood her ground firmly this time. She flat out refused to allow him inside the beach house for several agonizing days, effectively forcing him to sleep uncomfortably in his car parked outside. It wasn't the first time alcohol had driven a painful wedge between them, and it certainly wouldn't be the last such incident. Still, somehow, through it all, they managed to find their difficult way back to each other repeatedly. Even though they successfully kept most of their private turmoil carefully away from public scrutiny, persistent rumors about potential problems in their marriage gradually began to swirl and circulate. The most explosive and damaging rumors emerged in the late 1960s, when tabloid publications claimed Newman had been romantically involved with a journalist named Nancy Bacon during the filming of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The gossip took an especially cruel turn when various magazines started mockingly referencing his old hamburger quote, sarcastically suggesting that maybe he wasn't actually above picking up some bacon after all. Multiple reports claimed that Newman and Woodward attempted to silence the spreading rumors by taking out a direct newspaper advertisement. But Nancy Bacon herself allegedly called their affair the absolute worst kept secret in all of Hollywood. Whether the stories were deliberately exaggerated or contained genuine truth, the resulting damage to Newman's pristine reputation and the stability of his marriage was very real and lasting. Throughout all of this personal turmoil, one of Newman's biggest ongoing struggles remained his complicated relationship with fatherhood itself. He frequently admitted quite openly that he never felt truly ready or properly prepared to become a parent, and that he essentially only did it because society expected it of him. In private conversations with close friends, he confessed candidly that he didn't think he'd been a particularly good father to any of his children, even going so far as to say that he personally wouldn't have wanted to be one of his own children growing up. For a man who had masterfully conquered virtually every challenging role placed before him on screen, the demanding role of dad remained the one he never felt he performed adequately or got right. That deep personal pain came to an absolutely devastating head in November 1978 when unimaginable tragedy struck their family. Newman's son Scott, just 28 years old with his entire life ahead of him, died after accidentally overdosing on a lethal combination of alcohol and drugs. The sudden loss completely shattered Paul emotionally. But from that unimaginable grief and profound sense of failure, Newman managed to carve out an entirely new sense of purpose and meaning. In 1980, just 2 years after losing his beloved son, he launched the Scott Newman Center, a non-profit organization specifically dedicated to educating young people about the very real dangers of substance abuse. The mission steadily grew and expanded over time, eventually broadening into the Rowdy Ridge Gang Camp, an innovative program specifically created to support entire families battling addiction challenges together. Through all the sustained turmoil, the profound heartbreak and the persistent personal demons he faced throughout his life, Paul Newman's acting career didn't just merely continue along. It absolutely soared to even greater heights. With each successive role, Paul Newman kept digging deeper emotionally and psychologically. He possessed this truly uncanny ability to take on characters who were outlaws, misfits, and underdogs and give them genuine weight and authentic humanity, all while wrapping everything in that seemingly effortless charisma that became his unmistakable trademark. Decades after his breakthrough performance in The Hustler, he returned as the character Fast Eddie Felson in The Color of Money in 1986 and finally claimed that long-overdue Academy Award. But that hard-earned win didn't slow his momentum even slightly. Newman kept consistently delivering standout performances and methodically building a legacy that extended far beyond film, encompassing remarkable generosity and philanthropy. Somehow remarkably, he only seemed to improve and deepen with advancing age. Consider performances like The Verdict or Nobody's Fool, roles that showcased him at his most powerfully restrained yet utterly magnetic. Still, acting didn't always come naturally easy for Newman despite his success. According to reports, there came a specific point when he simply grew genuinely tired of Hollywood's demands and politics and made the decision to step away from it entirely for an extended period. When he finally chose to return in 1998 with the film Twilight, he portrayed a weary, world-beaten private detective in a production that struggled considerably through its troubled post-production phase. It wasn't a massive commercial success by any measure, but it effectively reminded everyone of Newman's quiet, understated power on screen. Then came Road to Perdition, where he portrayed a ruthless mob boss with absolutely chilling depth and authenticity, earning yet another well-deserved Oscar nomination. Advancing age didn't dull his considerable edge even slightly. It actually refined and sharpened it further. But acting represented only one significant part of Paul Newman's remarkably full life story. Away from the bright lights and carefully controlled environments of film sets, he maintained a second adrenaline-filled passion: professional auto racing. Most celebrities casually dip into motorsports as though it's merely an exciting weekend hobby or publicity opportunity. But Newman approached it completely differently. He wasn't remotely interested in simply posing behind the wheel for photographs. He treated competitive racing with precisely the same fierce intensity and dedication he brought to his most demanding and iconic film roles. He competed as a fully legitimate professional driver for more than 30 remarkable years, still aggressively chasing the finish line well into his 80s. And make no mistake, he wasn't just present to fill out the roster or add celebrity appeal. He genuinely wanted to stand on that winner's podium. His devotion to motorsports stretched far beyond simply the driver's seat, too. As co-owner of Newman Haas Racing, He actively helped build an absolute powerhouse team that completely dominated kart and IndyCar racing from 1983 all the way through 2011, but that all-consuming passion actually started long before any of the trophies accumulated. Newman had always been a genuine car enthusiast at heart. He owned an entire collection of Volkswagen Beetles and even had one specially fitted with a Porsche engine, creating what he affectionately called a neat little bomb back in 1970. That same pivotal year, one particular movie fundamentally changed everything for him regarding racing. The 1969 film Winning featured Newman playing race car driver Frank Capua, and even though the film didn't exactly break box office records, it sparked something profound and lasting deep inside him. To properly prepare for the demanding role, he and co-star Robert Wagner underwent intensive training at the Bob Bondurant Racing School and personally attended a major race at Watkins Glen. That immersive experience transformed casual fascination into complete obsession. By his mid-40s, Paul Newman had discovered and fully committed to a legitimate second career as a real, competitive race car driver. Instead of simply buying flashy, expensive cars or joining celebrity-oriented racing teams for publicity, he started small and humble, driving a Datsun 510 for Bob Sharp Racing. It was an extremely modest car by racing standards, but it taught him invaluable lessons about precision and discipline. The partnership benefited both parties involved. Newman got his genuine start in professional racing, and Datsun gained a legitimate star who could actually drive competitively and win races. He even appeared in their advertising campaigns later and won multiple championships driving their cars. To keep unwanted attention focused away from his celebrity status, he raced under the deliberately understated name P.L. Newman. It was his personal way of keeping everything focused on the sport itself and his performance, not on the Hollywood spotlight. One particular story from a Florida race perfectly captures his refreshingly down-to-earth attitude, despite his fame. Dressed casually in an ordinary McDonald's t-shirt and comfortable loafers, Newman went out to eat with motorsports journalist Robin Miller. When their waitress asked directly if he was really the famous Paul Newman, Miller quickly brushed it off, claiming he was just a regular painter working temporarily at the track. Newman reportedly laughed heartily about that encounter the entire way back. By 1972, Newman was genuinely ready to go fully professional in racing. His first official professional race took place at Thompson International Speedway in Connecticut, driving a Lotus Elan for Bob Sharp Racing. It marked the real beginning of his extensive run with the Sports Car Club of America, where he raced consistently throughout the entire 1970s. Then came the really big one, the legendary 24 Hours of Le Mans endurance race in 1979, where he competed alongside talented teammates Dick Barber and Rolf Stommelen. Newman drove for nearly a full 24-hour period, ultimately finishing an impressive second place overall and capturing first place in their specific class. It was a genuinely incredible achievement, proving conclusively to everyone that he wasn't just playing at being a racer for fun, he absolutely was one. Throughout the entire 1980s, he remained with Bob Sharp Racing and completely conquered the Trans Am Series, securing his first major win at Brainerd International Raceway, driving a Datsun 280ZX Turbo. He was already 57 years old at that time, still competing fiercely against considerably younger drivers and absolutely holding his own. His racing ventures grew well beyond just personal driving. Partnering with Bill Freeman, he formed Newman Freeman Racing, which achieved notable success in the Can-Am series and even featured future Formula One world champion Keke Rosberg. Later, his successful partnership with Carl Haas gave birth to Newman Haas Racing, which became an absolutely dominant force with well over 100 victories, 246 total podium finishes, and multiple championship titles. Legendary drivers like Michael Andretti and Nigel Mansell transformed that team into absolute racing legend status. The single most impressive aspect of it all remains Newman's remarkable endurance and longevity. He didn't even begin racing seriously until reaching his 40s, yet he kept competing actively well into his 80s. One of his greatest individual moments arrived at the 1995 24 Hours of Daytona, where he co-drove a Ford Mustang for Roush Racing. The car, deliberately numbered 70 as a direct nod to his age, finished first in its class and an impressive third place overall, making him officially the oldest driver ever to win at a major endurance race. Even that remarkable achievement wasn't his final chapter. In 2004, at almost 80 years old, he returned once more to Daytona, this time driving a car painted specifically to promote Pixar's animated film Cars. The race didn't go according to plan, as an unfortunate engine failure ended their run prematurely, but the powerful symbolism of an 80-year-old racing legend still behind the wheel of a car tied directly to an animated movie celebrating racing said absolutely everything about who Paul Newman truly was at his core. But in 2008, that incredible drive and remarkable energy met a heartbreaking turn. In May, Newman made the difficult decision to step away from directing a Broadway stage production of Mice and Men, citing growing health concerns. By June, reports began surfacing publicly about a lung cancer diagnosis. Ever intensely private about personal matters, Newman deliberately chose to fight his battle quietly, keeping all the specific details carefully between immediate family and close friends. On September 26, 2008, Paul Newman passed away peacefully at age 83. When Paul Newman passed away in 2008, he left behind not merely a remarkable legacy in film and racing, but also an entire empire built fundamentally on kindness and genuine purpose, the Newman's own brand. He placed his complete trust in the future of that unique brand and the important charitable mission behind it in the hands of his longtime advisor and close personal friend, Robert Forrester. On paper, the arrangement sounded perfectly simple and straightforward, but according to Newman's eldest daughter, things didn't exactly unfold the way her father genuinely intended. She firmly believes the core values and guiding principles her father built the entire company upon have drifted seriously off course, and she's definitely not alone in this assessment. Several members of the Newman family have come forward publicly, absolutely convinced that Paul's treasured memory and original mission are being systematically betrayed. With her distinctive blonde hair, striking blue eyes clearly inherited from her father, and quiet confidence, she was instantly recognizable as genuinely being Newman's daughter, not just in obvious looks, but in authentic spirit and values. Nell genuinely shared Paul's deep love for quality food, for giving back to communities, and for protecting the great outdoors. That's precisely why it came as such a shocking surprise when in early 2015 her image was completely and deliberately erased from the label without explanation. No official announcement, no public statement, just suddenly gone. Even more surprising and troubling, around that exact same time, Nell herself seemed to mysteriously fade from active involvement in the very company she'd helped build from nothing. Back in 1993, working from her hometown of Santa Cruz, California, she had successfully convinced her initially skeptical father that organic foods genuinely represented the future of the industry, and she was absolutely right. She launched Newman's Own Organics with a crystal-clear vision to bring truly healthy, sustainable food products to everyday ordinary people at affordable prices. The very first product was pretzels, but they weren't just any ordinary pretzels. They represented a powerful symbol of something much bigger. Within just 1 year, they became the #1 selling organic snack in all of America. From that initial success, the hits just kept coming consistently. Newman's Own Organics rolled out organic fig Newtons and a diverse variety of other wholesome snacks that flew off store shelves nationwide. Nell, working closely alongside her dedicated business partner Peter Meehan, successfully built a brand that could be found everywhere, from small niche organic shops to massive supermarkets across the entire U.S. and Canada. Before long, her thriving organic line was seriously rivaling the popularity of the original Newman's Own brand that Paul had initially launched way back in 1982 with his close friend, the accomplished writer A.E. Hotchner. But somewhere along the way, things shifted dramatically and mysteriously. Nell quietly drifted out of the public spotlight, and her direct connection to the brand grew increasingly murky and unclear. As Paul grew older and his health declined, his focus turned almost entirely toward philanthropic activities. The Newman's Own Foundation, powered entirely by the company's profits, has donated well over $570 million to various charities worldwide. Its mission has always remained crystal clear: to actively support children suffering from serious illnesses, empower struggling communities, improve nutrition access, and inspire countless others to give back generously. Robert Forrester entered the picture many years before Paul's eventual passing. Before joining Newman's Own in 1993, he was already a well-respected consultant in the nonprofit world. Paul brought him on board specifically to help open the very first international hole in the Wall Gang camp, a special place where seriously ill children could temporarily forget their struggles and just be normal kids. The two men quickly became genuinely close. Forrester even worked for the foundation completely pro bono for 13 years straight, a clear sign of deep loyalty and shared purpose. Then in 2005, he officially became the foundation's chief operating officer, later stepping into the major roles of CEO of Newman's Own Inc. and co-executor of Paul's will. It represented a massive show of trust and confidence. In the years immediately following Paul's death, Forrester reported strong financial growth. Between 2008 and 2014, company revenue rose by more than 7%, and the foundation donated over $170 million to various charities. But as leadership continued evolving, new faces began steadily taking the reins. In 2014, Mike McGrath, a veteran from Wolfgang Puck Companies, became CEO of Newman's Own Inc., followed by Dave Best, formerly of General Mills and Unilever, who took over as COO. With each new leader brought on board came fresh ideas and distinctly new directions for the company. Paul Newman's daughters and his widow, the legendary actress Joanne Woodward, have made it absolutely clear that they harbor serious doubts about how things have been handled since Paul's death. When the specific details of how his substantial $600 million estate would be managed first came to light, the family was reportedly completely stunned. To this day, none of them retain any trust or respect whatsoever for the man at the center of it all, Robert Forrester. They've openly questioned his extensive control over the company and whether he's truly protecting the legacy Paul worked so incredibly hard to build. Paul's oldest daughter, Susan Kendall Newman, a former actress and television producer now actively involved in nonprofit work, has been especially outspoken about these concerns. She firmly believes her father's precious legacy has been dragged through the mud unnecessarily. In her view, her entire family has been essentially taken hostage by Forrester, who she directly claims is more focused on his own image and financial gain than on genuinely honoring Paul's original vision. Forrester, of course, has firmly and consistently denied all of these accusations, calling them completely and utterly false. Years earlier, when Paul was approximately 75 years old, he wrote an extremely important letter addressed specifically to his family, his close friends, and his personal lawyer. In that document, he outlined exactly how he wanted his personal finances and the future of the Newman's Own brand to be handled after his death. His plan seemed perfectly simple and clear. He explicitly wanted his daughters to have a meaningful voice in all the major decisions. He proposed creating individual charitable foundations for each of them, and together, those separate foundations would collectively guide the company's major strategic moves. By 2007, Paul had begun stepping back from the day-to-day operations significantly. He brought in a professional board of directors to oversee the business operations and appointed Robert Forrester as chairman. But even then, Paul remained adamant that his daughters would maintain ultimate authority through their own individual foundations. That's when things began getting seriously complicated. Later that same year, Paul received his devastating lung cancer diagnosis, and everything shifted again dramatically. Just weeks after his diagnosis, he made sweeping, dramatic changes to his will. The document was almost completely rewritten in the spring of 2008, just mere months before his passing. Forrester insisted firmly that Paul was still mentally sharp and clear-minded at the time these changes were made, but Paul's doctors had started noting some concerning cognitive decline, and his daughters shared deep concerns about his true mental state when those critical revisions were made. When the will was finally read officially, one major detail stood out glaringly. The specific clauses guaranteeing his daughters' seats on the Newman's Own board were completely gone, entirely removed. Not long after, Paul promoted Forrester and another executive, Brian Murphy, to positions that essentially gave them equal authority with him, effectively handing them total control over the entire company. That strategic move meant Paul's daughters and their charitable foundations were now completely under the direction of Forrester and the board with no independent authority. By 2015, Paul's daughters could no longer stay silent about their concerns. They publicly revealed that they'd been completely stripped of meaningful influence, describing themselves as essentially handcuffed by new restrictive company policies. They claimed their voices were being deliberately silenced and that the heart of their father's mission was being lost entirely. The family became especially vocal when the Scott Newman Center, named after Paul's late son, and the Newman Haas racing team both suddenly lost their funding completely. To them, these were decisions their father would never have allowed under any circumstances. Then came another deeply emotional blow. Nell Newman's image was quietly removed from the Newman's Own Organics label without family consultation. The company said it was simply a move toward brand cohesiveness, suggesting that few people actually recognized her face anyway. But to the family, that explanation didn't sit right at all. After all, Paul would never have removed his own daughter from the brand she helped bring to life. So the lingering question remains. Is Newman's Own still the same company Paul Newman originally envisioned? It depends entirely on who you ask. His family believes firmly that his legacy is being trampled, while others suggest their frustration might stem from being written out of his will. But one fact stands absolutely firm. Newman's Own continues operating as a nonprofit organization, donating 100% of its after-tax profits to charity. So while the company's leadership structure and internal operations may have changed significantly, the core of Paul Newman's original mission to give back generously still lives on.